Harmony Creek was the kind of place you might see on a postcard. It was a town where everyone seemed to know everyone else. The streets were lined with old oak trees, their branches forming a canopy over the quiet roads. On any given afternoon, you would see neighbors chatting over their white picket fences. Children would ride their bicycles down the sidewalks, their laughter echoing in the air. The town square, with its charming gazebo and well-tended flower beds, was the center of community life. It was a place for summer concerts and holiday festivals, a place where memories were made. People moved to Harmony Creek for a sense of peace, a refuge from the chaos of the big city. Life here followed a predictable and comforting rhythm. The local diner, the Corner Spoon, was always bustling at breakfast time. The smell of coffee and bacon would drift out onto Main Street, a familiar morning greeting. The high school football team, the Harmony Creek Hornets, was the pride of the town. On Friday nights in the fall, the entire community would gather under the stadium lights, their cheers rising into the crisp night air. It was a town built on tradition, on shared values, and on the simple belief that good neighbors made a good life. There was a deep-seated trust that ran through the veins of the community, an unspoken agreement that they were all in this together. This was a place where doors were often left unlocked, not out of carelessness, but out of a profound sense of security. The idea that a real threat could emerge from within their own idyllic world was almost unthinkable. Crime, when it happened, was usually minor, a teenager's mischief or a petty dispute. The local police blotter was more likely to report a lost cat than a serious offense. This deep-seated feeling of safety was the very essence of Harmony Creek's identity. It was what made it special, what made it home. People believed they were insulated from the harsh realities that plagued other parts of the world. And so, when darkness did fall upon Harmony Creek, it fell with a terrifying and unfamiliar force. It didn't creep in from the outside, it rose up from within, shattering the illusion of perfect harmony. The town was about to learn a brutal lesson. They would discover that even in the most peaceful of places, evil could take root. The comfortable rhythm of their lives was about to be broken by a single violent act, an act that would change the town forever, leaving a permanent scar on its once pristine heart. The story that unfolded would become a cautionary tale whispered for generations. Frederick Banks was a part of Harmony Creek's gentle rhythm. He was a man of simple pleasures and unwavering routine. At 68 years old, he had lived in the same small, immaculately kept house for over 4 decades. He was a retired accountant, a widower who had lost his beloved wife, Eleanor, to cancer 5 years prior. His days were structured, predictable, and filled with the quiet activities that brought him joy. Every morning, just after sunrise, he would take his golden retriever, Buddy, for a long walk through the town park. He knew every dog walker by name, and always had a friendly word for anyone he passed on the path. His life was a testament to consistency. After his walk, he would drive his old, reliable sedan to the Corner Spoon. He'd sit in the same booth every single day, order 2 eggs over easy with wheat toast, and read the local paper from front to back. The waitresses adored him. He always left a generous tip and asked about their families. Frederick was more than just a customer. He was a fixture, a comforting presence in the morning rush. He was known for his kindness, for the small, thoughtful gestures that defined his character. He would leave fresh vegetables from his garden on his neighbors' doorsteps and volunteer at the local library, helping children find books. In the afternoons, you could almost always find Frederick in his garden. It was his sanctuary, a vibrant tapestry of flowers and vegetables, that he tended with meticulous care. He talked to his roses as if they were old friends and waged a gentle war against the weeds. His neighbors would often see him out there, a wide-brimmed hat on his head, humming a tune from a bygone era. He was a quiet man, but his presence was deeply felt in his small corner of the world. He represented the very best of Harmony Creek, decent, hard-working, and kind to a fault. He was the grandfather of the neighborhood, a steady and reassuring figure. Frederick wasn't wealthy or famous, but he was rich in a way that mattered in Harmony Creek. He was rich in friendships and respected by all who knew him. He was the kind of person who made the community feel whole. His children were grown and lived in other states, but he spoke to them on the phone every Sunday evening, a cherished ritual. He lived a life of quiet dignity, a life that seemed utterly immune to violence. The idea that anyone could wish harm upon such a gentle soul was simply beyond comprehension. But someone did. Someone watched his predictable routine and saw not a life to be admired, but an opportunity to be exploited. The first sign that something was wrong was subtle. It was a break in the unwavering routine of Frederick Banks. On that chilly Sunday morning, his next-door neighbor, a woman named Carol, noticed his newspaper was still on the porch at 10 a.m. Frederick always retrieved his paper by 7 a.m. at the latest. A small knot of unease began to form in her stomach. Then she noticed that his usually open curtains were drawn tight. But what truly set off the alarm bells was the sound she didn't hear. The frantic, happy barking of Buddy, Frederick's golden retriever, who was always let out into the backyard first thing in the morning. Carol tried calling his phone, but it went straight to voicemail. She walked over and knocked on his front door, calling out his name. The only response was a profound and unsettling silence. Her unease grew into genuine fear. She knew Frederick had a weekly phone call with his daughter, and she worried he might have had a fall or a medical emergency. After trying the back door and finding it locked, she felt she had no other choice. With a trembling hand, she dialed 911, her voice filled with concern as she explained to the dispatcher that something was terribly wrong at her neighbor's house. When the police arrived, they found the front door unlocked. The first officer who stepped inside was immediately struck by the stillness of the house. It was too quiet. As he moved through the tidy living room, he saw signs of a struggle. A lamp was knocked over, and papers were scattered on the floor. In the hallway leading to the bedroom, the officer made the devastating discovery. Frederick Banks was lying on the floor. It was immediately clear that this was not a medical emergency. The scene was brutal, violent, and utterly at odds with the peaceful home it had once been. The heart of Harmony Creek had stopped. The initial investigation began with a grim purpose. The house was sealed off, and the state's crime scene unit was called in. Every surface was dusted for fingerprints, every fiber collected as potential evidence. The medical examiner determined that Frederick had died from multiple blunt force trauma injuries. There were no signs of forced entry, which suggested a terrifying possibility. Frederick may have known his killer. He may have willingly opened his door to the person who would end his life. As investigators worked under the harsh glare of forensic lights, a dark question hung in the air. Who could have harbored such rage against a man known only for his kindness? As investigators began to piece together Frederick Banks's final days, a name started to surface. It wasn't a stranger or a shadowy figure from out of town. It was someone from within the community, someone who had been on the periphery of Frederick's life. His name was Leo Vance. At 28 years old, Leo was a stark contrast to the quiet stability of Harmony Creek. He had a troubled history, a string of minor offenses that kept him on the radar of local law enforcement. He had grown up in the town, but he always seemed to be on the outside looking in, a ghost haunting the edges of the idyllic community. Leo's background was a sad story of missed opportunities and bad choices. He had dropped out of high school and struggled to hold down a steady job. He drifted from one menial position to another, often getting fired for his poor attitude or for simply not showing up. He had a known problem with drugs, an addiction that fueled a constant need for cash. This desperation had led to arrests for petty theft and shoplifting. He was known around town as a ne'er-do-well, a young man who had squandered his potential. He was often seen hanging around the town square, looking aimless and resentful, a stark contrast to the happy families that surrounded him. The connection between Leo Vance and Frederick Banks was tragically simple. A few weeks before the murder, Frederick had hired Leo to do some yard work. It was a classic Frederick gesture, giving a troubled young man a chance, a way to earn some honest money. Frederick had paid him fairly and even given him a little extra, hoping to encourage him. But for Leo, this act of kindness was not a lifeline, it was an opportunity. He saw Frederick's well-kept home, his comfortable life and his trusting nature. He saw not a man to be respected, but a target to be exploited. Investigators believed that Leo's motive was robbery, a crime born of desperation to feed his addiction. He likely returned to Frederick's house under the pretense of asking for more work or perhaps to repay a small debt. Knowing Frederick's kindness, he would have been let inside without a second thought. But this time, Leo's intentions were dark. When Frederick refused to give him more money, or perhaps when he realized Leo was there to steal from him, the situation escalated with shocking speed. The kindness that had defined Frederick's life had, in a cruel twist of fate, made him vulnerable to the darkness that festered within Leo Vance. With Leo Vance identified as a person of interest, the investigation intensified. Detectives began by meticulously tracking his movements in the days surrounding the murder. They discovered that Leo had been seen near Frederick's neighborhood on the Saturday evening before the body was discovered. A witness recalled seeing someone matching his description walking away from the area late that night, looking agitated. This was a crucial piece of the puzzle, placing Leo in the right place at the right time. The timeline was starting to form, and Leo was at the center of it. The net was slowly, but surely, beginning to tighten around him. The next major breakthrough came from financial records. Investigators found that Leo Vance, who was known to be perpetually broke, had suddenly come into a small sum of money on the Sunday morning after the murder. He had made a cash deposit at an ATM several towns over, a deposit that was inconsistent with his known income. Furthermore, pawnshop records revealed that Leo had sold a distinctive silver watch just 2 days after the murder. When detectives showed a photograph of the watch to Frederick's daughter, she broke down in tears. It was the watch she had given her father for his 65th birthday. Armed with this mounting evidence, police obtained a warrant to search Leo's small, run-down apartment. The search yielded the most damning evidence of all. Tucked away in a closet, they found a pair of sneakers. The tread pattern on the soles was a perfect match for a bloody footprint found on the polished hardwood floor of Frederick Banks's hallway. Forensic analysis later confirmed that the blood on the sneakers belonged to Frederick. They also found a sweatshirt with a small dark stain that also tested positive for the victim's blood. For the investigators, this was the final, irrefutable link. Just over a week after Frederick Banks's body was found, the police moved in. They found Leo Vance at his apartment, seemingly unaware of the closing net. He was arrested without incident, his face a mask of detached indifference. As he was led away in handcuffs, a small crowd of neighbors gathered, their faces a mixture of shock and relief. The arrest of one of their own sent a new wave of fear through Harmony Creek. The shadow that had fallen upon their town now had a name and a face, and it was a face they had seen every day. The nightmare was far from over. It was just entering a new, public and painful phase. The trial of Leo Vance began 6 months later, and it was the only thing anyone in Harmony Creek could talk about. The small county courthouse was packed every single day. The community, once united in its peaceful existence, was now captivated by the grim proceedings. The prosecution, led by a seasoned district attorney, laid out its case with methodical precision. They painted a picture of a desperate young man, fueled by addiction, who had preyed upon the kindness of an elderly citizen. They argued that this was not a random act of violence, but a calculated robbery that had gone horribly wrong. The prosecution's case was built on a mountain of forensic and circumstantial evidence. They presented the sneakers, with Frederick's blood on them, showing the jury the perfect match to the footprint at the crime scene. They brought in the pawn shop owner, who identified Leo as the person who sold Frederick's unique silver watch. The ATM records showing the mysterious cash deposit were displayed for the jury to see. Each piece of evidence was a brick in the wall closing in on Leo Vance. The prosecutor called Frederick's daughter to the stand, and her tearful testimony about her father's kindness and his cherished watch left the courtroom in somber silence. The defense attorney, a public defender appointed to the case, faced an uphill battle. With no alibi for Leo and a wealth of physical evidence against him, their strategy was to create reasonable doubt. They argued that the police had zeroed in on Leo too quickly, suffering from tunnel vision and ignoring other potential leads. They tried to discredit the witness who saw Leo near the neighborhood, suggesting it was too dark to make a positive identification. They claimed the money Leo deposited came from an odd job he had done, though they could provide no proof of this employment. The defense tried to portray Leo as a victim of circumstance, a troubled kid who was being framed. Throughout the trial, Leo Vance himself remained eerily calm and detached. He sat at the defense table, rarely showing any emotion, even as photos from the brutal crime scene were displayed. He did not take the stand in his own defense. His silence was unnerving to many in the courtroom. It was as if he were watching a movie about someone else's life. The jury, a group of 12 citizens from the surrounding county, listened intently to every word. They were tasked with weighing the evidence, with separating fact from speculation, and with delivering a verdict that would bring some form of closure to a town in mourning. After 3 weeks of testimony, the case was handed over to the jury. The town of Harmony Creek held its breath. The deliberation felt agonizingly long. For 2 full days, the 12 men and women remained sequestered, debating the fate of Leo Vance. In the corner spoon, conversations were hushed and people checked their phones constantly for news. The community was on edge, waiting for the final chapter of this tragic story to be written. They craved a resolution, a clear and decisive end to the uncertainty that had plagued them since that terrible Sunday morning. The question of guilt or innocence hung over the town like a heavy fog. Finally, on the afternoon of the second day, word came from the courthouse. The jury had reached a verdict. The courtroom was quickly filled to capacity, a tense silence descending as the jury filed back into the box. The foreman, a middle-aged man with a grim expression, avoided eye contact with everyone. He handed the folded piece of paper to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge. The judge read it silently, his face betraying no emotion, before handing it back to the foreman to be read aloud. In that moment, the entire room seemed to stop breathing. Frederick Banks's family clutched each other's hands, their knuckles white. The foreman cleared his throat, his voice steady as he broke the silence. On the charge of murder in the first degree, we the jury find the defendant Leo Vance guilty. A collective gasp and then a quiet sob echoed through the courtroom. Frederick's daughter wept openly, a release of months of pent-up grief and anxiety. On the other side of the room, Leo Vance showed no reaction. He simply stared forward, his expression unchanged, as if he had known this was coming all along. He was a statue of indifference in a sea of overwhelming emotion. The shadow that had haunted Harmony Creek had finally been brought into the light and judged. The guilty verdict was not a celebration. It was a somber, collective exhale. It was a confirmation of the town's worst fears, that the monster was not a stranger, but one of their own. While there was relief that justice had been served, there was no joy. The verdict couldn't bring Frederick Banks back. It couldn't erase the violence of his death or the fear that now lingered in the community. Sentencing followed a few weeks later. Leo Vance was given a sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole. He was sent away, but the memory of his crime and of the kind man he had killed would remain in Harmony Creek forever. In the months and years that followed the trial, Harmony Creek tried to heal. The gazebo in the town square was still there. The Friday night football games continued, but something fundamental had changed. The easy trust that had once been the town's bedrock was fractured. People started locking their doors more diligently. They looked at their neighbors, and sometimes at strangers, with a new, subtle hint of suspicion. The story of Frederick Banks became a local legend, a cautionary tale told to remind people that the world was not as safe as it seemed, not even here. The murder had left an invisible but indelible mark on the town's soul. For Frederick's family, the verdict brought a sense of justice, but not peace. His children sold the house, unable to bear the thought of entering the place where their father had spent his final terrifying moments. The beautiful garden he had tended with such love became overgrown with weeds before the new owners took over. His daughter, who had once loved visiting Harmony Creek, found it difficult to return. The town was no longer a place of happy childhood memories. It was a place forever associated with loss and trauma. The empty booth at the corner spoon was a constant silent memorial to the man who was no longer there. The community tried to honor Frederick's memory in its own way. The library where he had volunteered dedicated a reading corner to him, with a small brass plaque bearing his name. A new scholarship fund was started in his honor at the high school, rewarding a student who demonstrated kindness and community service. These were gestures of remembrance, attempts to ensure that Frederick Banks was remembered for the life he lived, not for the way he died. They were small acts of light, pushing back against the darkness that had so unexpectedly invaded their town. Yet, the echoes of the crime remained. The name Leo Vance became synonymous with betrayal. His family, who were also longtime residents of Harmony Creek, eventually moved away, unable to bear the shame and the constant whispers. The case forced the community to confront uncomfortable truths about itself, about poverty, addiction, and the quiet desperation that can exist even in the most picturesque of settings. Harmony Creek was still a good place to live, but it was a wiser, sadder, and more cautious place than it had been before. The nightmare was over, but the town would never fully wake up from it. The story of Frederick Banks and Harmony Creek serves as a chilling reminder about the nature of safety. We often seek out small towns and close-knit communities with the belief that they are sanctuaries, places insulated from the random violence we see on the nightly news. We build our lives on a foundation of trust and familiarity, believing that knowing our neighbors is a shield against harm. This desire for a safe harbor is a fundamental human instinct. We want to believe that there are still places where goodness prevails and darkness cannot penetrate. Harmony Creek was the embodiment of that belief for everyone who lived there. However, this sense of security can sometimes be an illusion. The case demonstrates that evil is not just an external force that invades from the outside. It can be homegrown. It can fester in the shadows of even the most idyllic communities, born from desperation, addiction, or resentment. The monster is not always a stranger lurking in the dark. Sometimes it has a familiar face. It's the person you nod to on the street, the troubled kid you try to help, the neighbor you think you know. This is a terrifying and deeply unsettling realization, as it undermines our most basic assumptions about the world. The tragedy in Harmony Creek forces us to consider the delicate balance between trust and caution. Frederick Banks was a good man whose kindness was tragically exploited. His story does not suggest that we should stop being kind or stop trusting others. To do so would be to let the darkness win completely. It would mean sacrificing the very qualities that make a community strong and vibrant. A life lived in constant fear and suspicion is not truly living. Frederick's life, filled with friendship and generosity, was a life well lived, and its violent end does not diminish its value or its beauty. Ultimately, justice was served for Frederick Banks. The person responsible for his death was caught and held accountable by the legal system. But true safety is more complex than just locks on doors and an effective police force. It's about building a community that is aware, compassionate, and willing to address the root causes of desperation before they curdle into violence. Harmony Creek learned this lesson in the hardest way possible. The town may have lost its innocence, but in its place it gained a deeper, more sober understanding of the world and of the enduring need to look out for one another, not just with trust, but with wisdom.